So while you're thinking about this, people talked about their pathway. How many people here are educators? How many researchers? How many administrative types? So a little bit of everything. How many are more than one? Because we're almost always more than one. And, I do a lot of counseling now of medical students and residents and fellows regarding what should they do with their lives. And the point I try to make is that this is time to no longer try to please your parents, your brothers and sisters, even your significant other. This is time to dig deep and decide what is it that you want to accomplish with your life. John Maxwell once said that a vision is a doable dream based on knowledge, experience, and imagination. So you ask yourself, what do I know about myself? What have been my life experiences? What am I good at? What am I not good at? What I love doing? What do I hate doing? And you come up with some kind of idea of what you want to do. It isn't to become a residency director or the president of ASAP or a dean, because those are transient positions. It is trying to be the best teacher you can be, the best researcher you can be, the best leader that you can be. Peter Rosen made me read a book on career choices back when I was a resident in 1979 at the University of Chicago. And in that book, they recommended an exercise where you write a paragraph talking about who you are, what you want to be, what you think you're good at, and then you pare it down to the point where you've got 7 words or less to come up with a personal mission statement. So at the time, I was the oldest of 6 boys, growing up in a large Midwestern family. I was a babysitter for my brothers while my parents were out working and picketing. My father worked, my mother picketed a lot. Opposite ends of the political spectrum. I was the head of the altar boys, the supreme grand knight. I thought I wanted to be a priest. In high school, I discovered sports and girls and lost my calling. But not my interest in doing something to give back. And so when I went through this exercise, I thought about it. I'm a big brother, and I like being a big brother. I wanted to do something for the poor. And when those things came together, I came up with a mission statement that was serve the poor through medical education activities. And that made, when they offered me the job of residency director at Harbor UCLA in California, it was clear that that was the job that I ought to take. 8 years later, the chairman left. We had a failed search for a chair because they were talking about closing the hospital to balance the county's budget. And I went through that same process again, and I came up with provide leadership to highly committed professional colleagues. And so I decided if I approached being a chair as the residency director for the faculty, helping them develop their careers while they helped me develop patient care, teaching, and research programs, I might be good at that and I might enjoy it. And I served as a chair for 25 years before I retired, and I loved every moment of it until the last 6 months, which is a 20-minute lecture I won't go into. So I think one of the things I would recommend is, if not that exercise, really dig deep. And it's for assistant professors and even associate professors. What is it that you want to accomplish with your life? What will make you happy on a day-to-day basis? Again, think about it. So I babbled here. There must be some people that have questions out here.
Well, thanks for coming out. My name is Bill. I'm a first-year attending down in Texas. It might be hard for you all to talk about, but what would you guys say was your biggest professional setback or biggest professional disappointment, and how would you say you worked through it? That's anybody in particular can answer that.
So I think I shared mine already. I got kicked in the teeth the very first time, had unrealistic expectations, and it was humiliating to think that you had prepared really well, but in fact I hadn't really prepared well. I'd gone about it all the wrong way and the wrong reasons. And you have 2 choices then. You can, it's always appropriate to lick your wounds for a period of time, and then you decide if you're going to get back into the game or go somewhere different, go a different direction, whether it's an investigative career or an administrative career. And I realized it meant that I had to do things completely different, but I still thought I had the passion for what I was doing. So I think everyone will face that opportunity to have a setback, and how you handle it will be the most important decision. Where are you at in Texas?
I'm with Integrative Emergency Services at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas.
Okay.
So there's a quote by Mark Twain: where does good judgment come from? Experience. Where does experience come from? Bad judgment. So I can't say that I had a single negative thing, but along the way, I've seen my personality change. You know, I was mentored by Ron Crome, much in the style of Peter Rosen as well. And I always imagine Ron as a serrated knife. And I'm like, yeah, you had to be harsh. You had to be really tough. You had to bitch. Oh, we're recording this. You had to really complain. And that isn't the way the current leaders of emergency medicine work. As a matter of fact, you look around, they're very calm. They're not emotional. They don't get into fights. They compromise, and they know how to really get along. So I'm like, wow. I learned all the wrong stuff because I picked them up. I really followed the actions that my mentors did. So I would say that's the biggest thing I've seen in the new leaders. You need to be calm and compromising, and you'll do great. I don't know if Susan will agree as a new chair.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Calm is important. I think my biggest kind of learning point lesson was, to get to the point where I was in leadership roles, I was doing many things myself with a team, but I was out there kind of doing it. And as I moved up my career, it became important to really step back and kind of slow it down and let others do a lot more. And, I thought, well, those were the skills that I learned, kind of, what Judy had said. I learned you get out there, you do it, you get it done and put it in front of people. And I like to get things done quickly and kind of move on. That's emergency medicine, right? Let's do it. But that did not work in a few very important situations in my career. And it made me step back and say, how do I do this differently to be able to accomplish the same goal? And letting other people just do it, let them take the credit. That's what a good leader does. The leader doesn't have to do it. They have to make sure that other people get the work done and it gets accomplished at the end of the day. So it was reframing how I looked at things and approached them.
I was wondering if I could ask Don, ask you a question. You were pretty specific in talking about one of your hurdle periods when you had a CV filled with presumably very nicely written.
Cute drivel, I think, was the exact phrase I used.
Yeah. Presumably very nicely written, but not so impactful papers. And then you got fed up with that and you tried for an RO1. Could you say more about how did you break on through to the other side of that to where you are now?
It's a great question, Danny. So when I chose to submit the RO1, I did it out of convenience. An RFA came up in a topic that I really hadn't had a whole lot of expertise, but I had enough irrational exuberance to think that I would be able to just compete at that level. I'd learn about it quickly and write something because they were handing out money. It looked like that. And I realized that actually is not the path to success, and that had to look and really own up to why the failure happened, and did I really want to go through a life of delayed gratification? That's what an academic career is a lot about, particularly on the investigative side. And I decided, yes, I did, but I had to do it in topics that I had some passion about, and hope that the opportunities that matched my passion would come along the way, that I wouldn't be able to manufacture, just be opportunistic about whatever came down the pike. And so I met up with someone that I had trained with years ago who had an interesting idea about pneumonia and said, what do you think about this? And we had a conversation. It was the first time I ever worked with someone who was really another peer, but completely outside of emergency medicine, and had a lot of insight into their thoughts about how emergency physicians approach pneumonia, and then I had a lot of insight into what our partners do after we either treat someone with it or admit. And it was eye-opening to see not only the common ground, but the different grounds, and realize that together we could ask and answer a question much more effectively than either one of us could have done alone. So it was recognizing that I had this desire, but I had to focus on topics that really were important to me. If you're just chasing the most recent hot topic, I don't think you'll succeed. That's just not likely a very impactful career or successful plan for you.
researchers and your administrators. You do it all incredibly well. Do you think that career paradigm is going to still be the case going forward, where we can be the triple threat position?
So I think in the old days with emergency medicine, research was really easy. You wrote up a case series, and it was a Journal American College of Emergency Physicians paper. I think now, if you want to be a real researcher, and I say it as a non-real researcher, it's all-consuming. And so I think truly being a very successful triple threat would not be, if I were advising someone, the career aspiration. I think maybe 2 out of the 3 or 4, but I personally think all 4 in a triple threat is not likely as we've emerged as a true specialty.
I would agree. Research is an entirely different ball of wax. I do think you can, again, thinking about the average life expectancy of a program director, a department chair, a dean being about 5 to 7 years at most, it's really those basic skills. And I think those basic skills that you use to run an emergency department, to control an audience, to run a meeting at a national level, they're all fairly similar. And so I think you can have a pretty successful career, but I agree research is a different thing.
So I do think you can be the triple threat. I do think you need to prepare early. If you're on a research track, just by virtue of managing your grant and managing the people working under you are starting to give you those leadership skills, but you can't start early enough being involved in the other components that a chair is going to need if that's the course that you're going. So that if you're on a research track, being part of the operations side and going to operations meetings, which if you're in clinical research, you need to be aware of anyway. So yes, I think that you can. We're in our second chair search in 1 year, and there are those out there who are prepared, but they did prepare early. And I just wanted to make 2 quick comments to make a correction. You made a statement that always please, no, you don't always have to please anyone but yourself, but I would say please your significant other. They are an important, they're an important component. Without a happy significant other, life isn't happy. And the other comment is do what makes you happy. Nah, sometimes you don't really do what makes you happy. You have to put it in perspective. It has to make you happy to some degree, but sometimes early on you need to do things you might not want to do. That's how you grow as an individual. It isn't me, me, me. You're part of a department, and I would take advantage of all those people around you. And the very last comment to make about mistakes early on, I see, not that I've made that mistake, but I've been very lucky to always been in a department that's very supportive. Choose carefully the department you go into to make sure that it has the colleagues and the infrastructure that helps you build for success. So you can go into a department that's under-resourced but pays well or whatever, but I don't know if you're going to end up growing unless you're very good at networking out of your department and to find outside mentors. So very important looking at those around you to invest in your own growth.
Well, one more comment about research, and this is what I've always advised our residents or young faculty. You have to start right after residency, do a research fellowship, because that is a lifelong major goal. You will waste your time and do a lot of case reports and really not get anywhere if you don't do that. Now, what many of us are trying to do in our own universities, though, is raise the reputation of the clinician educator, because frankly, most medical schools don't care if you're a good teacher. They want you to bring in the grant money. And little by little, we've made, I think, a lot of improvement in that. So you can be a teacher, write curricula, develop a career in education, and still do quite well, I think. Can you mix all 3? No, you cannot.
And I guess I just add to this, you can have the triple or quadruple, you just can't have it all at the same time. You really can't. You may have portions of your career where you're focused on 2 of those things, but I agree with Corey. It's hard to be fully engaged in all 3 or 4, depending on whether you're a lump or a splitter. So you may have periods where you're more educationally focused than other periods, but so yeah, you can, but it's difficult and not all at the same time.
I want to correct Corey's correction of my statement. Was Andy, I'm sorry. I'm so used to Corey disagreeing with everything that I say. I do think if you're a resident thinking about a fellowship, or in fellowship thinking about academics, or as an assistant professor thinking about whether you're staying in academics, I do think you have to dig down deep and say, what is going to make me happy? I have had a number of people, both men and women, who have made the choice to go where the money's at in order to have the lifestyle that the family wants to have. I don't have anyone who chose an academic career who left it and was unhappy. I have had a number of graduates who I thought had potential in academics who went for income and lifestyle who were not happy later. So I didn't mean you don't make your significant other happy. Happy wife, happy life. But dig down deep at key times with key decisions.
Yeah, if I could give career advice that had any meaning, it would be to someone who is starting out to really focus, as Bob is saying, on what do you love. You need to incorporate all the variables, including debt and location, et cetera, but what do you really love doing? And then try to create a career around that that's viable. And if you can get paid for doing something that you love, it's a really wonderful ride. People are talking about 10 or 15 or 20 so years doing the same job. You can't do that unless you love it.
Since we're talking about so many possibilities in the career, it might be good to bring up the point at which you start learning how to say no. Because one thing that happens very early on is you see a career path, you're invited to participate in meetings, give talks, be on committees, and suddenly you're overwhelmed. Now, when you're young, it's good to start doing a lot of things and, I guess, overcommitting yourself. But there should always be a theme to that, not something here, something there, doing something on snake bites, then decide I'm going to do chest pain or whatever. So you need to follow a theme. And then once you establish a little bit of a reputation, learn how to say no when you get overcommitted. The worst thing is if you drop out of meetings, give a bad talk, somebody asks you to write a book chapter and it sucks, you're not going to be asked again. So learning how to say no and to keep your family happy, to achieve your goals is a pretty important part. And each of you are going to have to make that decision. I don't know how to say no, actually.
No, but you deliver. So as long yeah, and in fact, I'll just say this one more time. Making a commitment and not delivering early in a career is very, very, very bad. There are people who've contributed chapters to me or papers that either weren't acceptable or were very late. They'll never be invited again. When you're senior, you get a little more flex, but otherwise, no. One other thing, a lot of people here raise their hand that they're on the clinician educator track. I would emphasize what I said in my 10 minutes. Look carefully. There are funding sources out there for the clinician educator. Make sure if you're in academia to try and be in a department that understands how to help you get funding. SAEMF exists to support you. And in fact, SAEMF has money that they're not giving educators. They're not giving, they have money to give away. And so there's EMF and SAEMF, and there's any number of funding sources. And if you don't have a mentor, if you don't know how to find funding as a clinician educator, get in touch with me. You can't survive in academia anymore just because you want to teach.
So the answer is early no. I actually moderate a session for new department chairs on time management, but I didn't have time to put that talk together until I retired because I didn't manage my time as well. This series of books by Laura Vanderkam, What Successful People Do at Work, What Successful People Do in the Morning, What Successful People Do with Their Weekends, talks a lot about how much time, getting up 15 minutes earlier every morning, if you can do that. A lot of people do that to exercise. You can do that to read. Spending time after the kids go to sleep at night if you're a late night person. It does make the point that we waste a lot of our weekends. And if you think about 7 o'clock on Friday morning to 7 o'clock on a Friday evening to Monday morning, that's a huge amount of time that you might be able to restructure. She suggests to be a person, to be a husband, a wife, a parent, get involved in the Rotary, do other kinds of things. But it certainly is a time that you can use for other things like directed or intentional reading. There are only so many hours in the day. I have this lecture for chairs, and someone asked me to come and give it at USC to the faculty. So I came in, they all sat there very nicely. I think there were like 187 faculty there. It's a big place, not that many. And at the end, I had a woman stand up and go, I'm pregnant, I have 4 kids, I work 8 night shifts a month, I'm responsible for the clinic. How do I manage my time? And I realized, you know, I can tell a chair how to manage their time, but it's a whole different ball of wax. So I think the answer is prioritizing. You know, if you're, if being in shape physically is important to you, then you've got to find time to do it. If your family is important, you've got to find time for them. My father, at 82, wrote his memoir, published it, and sent it free to my brothers and I. And in the last chapter, he said 3 things. Make your boss happy. Actually, make your boss look good. Make your wife happy. And find some time for yourself. And he said he was really good at number 1, not as good as he'd hoped he'd be at number 2, and terrible at number 3. And so I think the question is really trying to come to some balance, and the earlier in your career you can do that, the better, because that will help you learn how to say no. Right? I mean, it really is. So sometimes we give up one textbook chapter to do something else, to put a lecture together for a national meeting. But really giving up time for yourself and your family is something you want to learn to say no about. You're familiar with the philosophy of yes? Yeah, I learned that from Greg Henry. You can use that in all walks of life. Whenever someone asks something from you, whether it's a patient asking for narcotics, the head nurse asking for something, your significant other wanting to go on a vacation to a place you never want to go, when people ask questions of you, requests of you, they always are worrying about the worst. And if your response is no, you know, your face scrunches up, your voice comes down, the wall comes up, there's no negotiating. So the first response, no matter what it is, should always be yes. You know, I'd understand why you'd want 40 milligrams of morphine, but, or absolutely, we're going to treat your pain as soon as. And so I think it's that same sort of thing. I remember going to my vice chair, who was the best person for any administrative task. Unfortunately, I kept going to him over and over again, and he was great at managing up, because no matter what I asked of him, he'd always go, absolutely, Bob. I actually put together a list of the things that I need to do for myself and that you've asked me to do, and if I don't alter this list, I'm never going to get to this. Where do you want me to put this on that list? And I'd look at his list and say, you know, why don't you go? And I'd call some other faculty member. And so I think there's a way of not saying no initially, but getting across the fact that this is, you know, nothing you really want to do, and then they'll push back and you can negotiate.
I would say, though, as you're building your academic career, pick something that you can achieve and do it. Don't have 4 or 5 open projects and not bring anything to conclusion. So if you decide if you were asked to write a book chapter, that's your book chapter, and that's your grand rounds presentation, that's your bedside teaching intervention, and you called your friend at another institution and they invited you to give grand rounds on that topic. So we've done 1 set of work and we've gotten 4 things that are building your CV. Do that for 5 years, I guarantee you'll be promoted. It's that formulaic, by the way, for promotion in academia, unless you're at one of the there's a few institutions that aren't quite that simple, but I can tell you 95% are. Guaranteed promotion, you've done it. And that's 1 project a year.
Well, I want to congratulate you on leaving the community environment and going into an academic environment. And if your co-faculty and residents haven't been thanking you gloriously, they will soon, because you are the most valuable kind of faculty member in an emergency department who's been out in the community. My thinking about ER training is sort of changing over the years. I mean, we wanted academics and full departments, and you had to be a tertiary care center. I mean, please, you call a consultant for every little thing. You are a rare resource, and you've got a lot to give in the department. So I just want to give you that boost. I think it's really, really super. For time management, I've never been a book reader like that. I just go by my bootstraps, and I have these calendars everywhere, giant calendars, and I block out or put a big X if I'm not going to be doing anything. If I work an afternoon shift, I work only afternoon shifts. I don't schedule myself for any meetings that day. I mean, I've been doing that a long time. So you just have to prioritize, as Bob said.
Yeah, and I think when you're doing any one of these tasks, you have to be fully in that and focus, and then compartmentalize to the next. I think nobody really multitasks, even though we say that about ourselves. What we do is jump around, and sometimes that actually erodes at your efficiency. And it's one thing in the middle of a department when you have to take care of 4 or 5 people. There's no choices about that. So when you're in the department, you are in the department. I don't take any more administrative calls while I'm working a shift. Everybody thinks they can talk to you as senior medical director or vice president in the middle of a shift. I don't think they would go to a surgeon in the middle of the operation and say, hey, do you mind talking about this VPMA is acting up? We wouldn't do that. You just, I think, have to, one of the skills to learn is how to focus at the moment and then move on to the next issue.
Have you had that happen to you where one person will talk in one ear and the other person in the other, and I'm like, oh my God, they think I have 2 different channels, whatever.
Did you just admit that you have multiple voices in your head? Did I hear that?
Are you after me?
I think we can take probably one more question. I want to emphasize, please fill out your evaluations for this session. I personally will evaluate this as one of the most impactful and unusual sessions that I've experienced at a medical conference. It is so wonderful for you to share your personal experiences and your travails and your successes on this level. I can't say how much I appreciate it. So maybe one more question, and then we can have a big round of applause.
My name is Sam. I'm from Sacramento, California. I've been out of residency for about 15 years, and actually I'm impressed by Dr. Tinelli's comment they would be a great clinician, because it's one of the things that sort of go by the wayside when you're out there for a while. You know, you get pressure to do all those administrative stuff, you do your research, you do your teaching. I feel like it's, you know, the least time I do is to do field shift is be a good clinician, you know, read up on it, do the latest. How important do you think it is to read up on the latest and greatest on research? And if that's the case, do you intentionally do it? Do you just kind of do like just in time kind of reading? How do you be a great clinician at sort of the mid-career and beyond?
Well, I do an awful lot of reading, obviously, and scanning of the literature. What I started doing to encourage other students and our junior residents, first and second year residents, to at least read or be familiar with the literature besides the blogs, I pick an article, I put it in my doctor bag, and I will bring it up, while we're working. Hopefully there will be a patient that is relative to that particular problem. A good example, actually, that I just used day before yesterday were the articles on giving Decadron 12 milligrams PO to somebody instead of prednisone after asthma. Well, for a long time I carried that in my bag because a lot of, even though it's out there, the residents weren't really reading about it. So I tried to do that. I try to give them good anecdotes about how other people have done good research or good clinical stuff. For example, do you guys know, men and women, excuse me, know the story of Barbara Backus, who did the Heart Score. If you don't know, I'll tell you later, but it's a great story. So talking to people about those kinds of things, what clinicians do, how they worked out their work is really important, I think.
So I have another take on it, and that is it's really good, I think, to read all the journal articles in all the journals and focus on the really important ones. And I think that's physiologically and physically impossible. My recommendation would be find one or two great review services that you like, that are user-friendly to you. Something from the West Coast, something from Harvard, spoon feed. There are like 5 or 6 different ways to really keep up with the literature by someone else doing the vast majority of work, and then you sound so current. There was I don't know if you read that article yesterday, but and I go, how do you keep up? I don't keep up. I have somebody else who keeps up, and I just tag along. That's my bias. Do the least amount of work possible to be very successful. So, while you keep your partner or partners happy.
But I'll add, I think clinical excellence is defining of being a physician. And I have a little bit of conflict with some of my more senior faculty who I don't believe are working enough clinically. This is really thin ice, and I'm looking who's in the room. But clinical excellence for me is defining. And so I would, I think going out to the community for your first couple of years is great. I know people who have been funded from their fellowship. They've never worked more than 8 hours a week. That's great, and they're expert in an area. They haven't done the 1,000 intubations, and they just don't have that clinical side that is important for me. And so I struggle a lot with this. I still work at least 2 and sometimes 4 shifts a week, and I work evenings, and so that frees me up for my administrative time during the day. I like being a doctor. I have difficulty recruiting faculty who can't convince me that they love providing clinical care. I don't know. It's a tough one.
You know, I think I talked about the difficulties that I thought we're having with residency training, that more probably needs to be in the community. But another big concern I have, certainly as for myself, is how do we keep up? You know, I can tell right away when people send in chapters or give commentaries, they'll be quoting doing something. I'm like, geez, oh man, you know, that's like 10 years old. Nobody, don't you know that? Don't you use your digital resources while you're working? And I don't know that we have the answer for that. I think using article abstractors are good. So it is one way. Reading journals is not going to get you very far because of any one journal, there might be 1 or 2 abstracts. Let me say the word abstract, not article, that you're going to find that's very helpful. So I don't think we've got the answer yet on how to keep up. Going to meetings like this is good, or ASAP is good, but that's not the full answer. I don't know what it is. You know what it is?
I don't, but I think we're probably at the end now. What is true is you can't read it all, period. You just can't do it. So you have to disavow yourself of that thought. You're going to only read a fraction. And the question is, what is that fraction and how are you going to supplement it?
Well, I think this has been a remarkable session. I hope we can have a big round of applause